All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark, and today we're going to be talking about Skeleton Crew Episode 4, directed by the Daniels, who are coming off their Oscar win for Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. There's a lot of hype coming into this episode for me, and I think a lot of people. And Episode 4 for me is interesting because, on one hand, I really enjoyed this episode, but it's not without its faults. And that's mostly due to some very convenient plot points throughout this episode and some pacing issues in the middle. And typically, when I review Star Wars shows, when they have huge conveniences, I'm typically very turned off by them, and I'm not very nice in these reviews. But Skeleton Crew is told so earnestly and with such love and respect for the property, and it brings so many new and fresh ideas to the Star Wars galaxy that I more easily overlook some of these issues that I usually am very hard on. And on top of that, there are some great character moments with Neil, who is the star of this episode, both from a comedic standpoint and also from a heartfelt standpoint. We really get to learn more about his character, and we see him have this great interaction with a local who is part of this war-torn planet. But also, at the end, we get a really emotional scene with Fern, who opens up to Wim about her feeling insecure about how she's leading them, and that typical tough exterior really melts away, and I think the actress here does a fantastic job. And I like how Skeleton Crew has really taken the time to give each of these kids their spotlights. The first two episodes really focused on Wim, the next one shifted towards KB, and then this one we get Neil and Fern in the forefront. Another big strength for me is that this episode continues to expand upon the mystery of At-Adden and these jewel planets of the Old Republic, while also bringing up more questions. It doesn't give answers and then you kind of know exactly where it's going to go. It gives you an answer here, but then it opens up three more questions, which is really a great sign for a mystery type show. My last critique before I dive into the episode itself is that there is still that feeling of an Earth-like setting in the Star Wars galaxy. The kids land on this planet and there's a playground there, and it's all things that we would find at a playground down the street in our neighborhood. So again, these things take me out of the Star Wars galaxy because I see these things and I think this looks like a show that is taking place in a future Earth setting instead of a galaxy far, far away. So I was very optimistic that the Earth-like comparisons that we saw in the first two episodes were going to taper off by the end of the series, but 4 episodes in, they're still here. Again, it's not a huge portion of the episode, but again, it's something I have to call out because to me, immersion is a huge piece of the Star Wars galaxy. So jumping into the episode, we land on a planet that is presumably At-Adden. That's what the coordinates say on the disc that they got from Kim, the owl lady that we saw in last episode. But when they get there, everything's destroyed, and it looks like it's a war-torn planet. So the kids are really confused, and I like that us as the audience, we're seeing this and we're hypothesizing, like, is this At-Adden? Did something happen already? Or everything is not as it seems, which it is revealed later on that this is a different planet called At-Akron, which is presumably part of the jewel planets of the Old Republic. This episode is a great example of environmental storytelling because the kids never receive a huge expositional dump monologue around what happened to At-Akron and why all of the inhabitants have fallen into tribal warfare with each other. Instead, we can infer from what we see in a lot of these shots that this planet is very similar to At-Adden in the fact that it has the suburban setting, it has all of the same buildings, and yet, for some reason, the society has degraded into factions. And the culture has shifted from data analysts and bookkeepers to child soldiers. And it's so much more interesting for the audience because you feel like an active member. You're theorizing along with the children, and you're not just being told by the inhabitants, hey, 20 years ago, we had an uprising and our power structure fell apart. Like, all of that would have just been like, okay, got it, heard this story before. But instead, through the characters' actions, through what we see in the environment, we understand that things devolved on this planet. And so in one respect, we get answers that At-Adden isn't the only jewel planet of the Old Republic left. We see that there's other planets with similar power structures. But on the other hand, we have so many more questions. It opens so many doors. Is the commissioner that we heard from on At-Adden controlling all of these planets? How are they all connected? Why do they all live under this suburban utopia type setting? How did they separate themselves from the galaxy? And of course, could this happen on At-Aden? What exactly happened here? For me, I feel like it was a rebellion of some sort. They found out to some degree what was happening, that it was all a facade, something was a sham, and the people rose up against the commissioner of the planet or the power structure of the planet, and now it's complete anarchy. So I think from a storytelling standpoint, that was the strongest piece of this episode. So the kids are taken in by the local tribe, but they tell Jod to stay on the ship, and he does. He listens to them. He's very much holding up his end of the bargain, and he's trying to fix SM, who becomes a big factor at the end of this episode when I get to that portion. But the kids meet these two child soldiers who are out on a scouting party, and they take them into their base camp, and they meet the leader. And you can tell there's something wrong here because obviously there's child soldiers, so any place that has child soldiers, there's a bigger issue or there's some nefarious things going on. Sure, there's a piece of survival to it, and it looks like the girl isn't completely upset at her situation, but as we see throughout the episode, though, there is a complacency baked into her character that this is all she ever knows, so she's not going to question it, and she is clearly good at it. She is a capable, strong leader, even at such a young age. So the kids meet the leader, and the leader is like, you're now going to train under our supervision, and we'll show you the hidden temple, or whatever it's called, but you have to prove yourself in training. And this is a piece of the episode that I thought was kind of clunky. It feels like this was a plot point just to separate the kids from Neil, so Neil could have his moment in this episode to talk to the local girl, because clearly these kids wouldn't be useful child soldiers for this tribe leader. And later on in the episode, it doesn't really amount to anything, and it feels like a stupid plan on their part. I know you can make the argument that the kids were essentially supposed to be cannon fodder, or were supposed to be decoys that draw out the other tribe, and then they would be able to get the jump on them. But when that scene comes together, it all feels very clunky. So I think there's funny moments in this training that the kids do, but I also feel like there was a stronger way to separate Neil from them, and maybe a more sinister way for the tribe to manipulate them to do something for them that would put them in real danger, instead of being a scouting party that walks 5 feet ahead of them at the end of the episode and then nothing happens. So not the strongest part of this episode. What is the other strong part of the episode is Neil and his interaction with this local girl. Neil Nation is so real. I know they tried to force the Yord Horde down our throat with the Acolyte. That was something that never existed, and I just hated how corporate and made up that felt. But this feels natural because Neil rules. I compared him to Samwise Gamgee in the first 2 episodes, and that comparison is very much holding up. He's a pacifist. He's perceived as someone who's weak because he doesn't want to fight, but as we see later in the episode, he fights for things he cares about if he needs to, and his perceived weakness is actually his biggest strength, because his weakness makes him kind. It was a sweet line that the local girl said to him towards the end of the episode that I really enjoyed. And in general, my favorite scene from this episode, aside from what I'll talk about a little bit later, is when Neil gets the spotlight and he's talking to this girl and being completely open and honest about his feelings, trying to get through to her to say, this isn't normal. Being at war all the time at your age is not normal. And because Neil is so sweet and genuine, this doesn't feel preachy. It doesn't feel like the writers are talking to the audience. It just feels like a character genuinely expressing themselves. And the icing on top is that Neil has a little crush for her, so we're rooting for Neil, but we can tell that he doesn't have any game. He's not trying to be flirtatious with her. He's just genuinely curious about her and is worried for her safety and how she's living her life. It's a great extension of Neil's strongest character trait, and that is his kindness, because in previous episodes, obviously he's looking out for Wim, but in the last episode, we get a little moment where he's feeding the little rat that lives inside SM, and he has a little moment there, and we see that he looks out for other living beings. And in the end, to cap it all off, the girl gives him a little kiss on the trunk at the end of the episode, and we get this hilarious shot of Neil essentially having hearts pop out of his eyes as the camera just is fixated on him staring at this girl as she walks away, as he tilts his head and his hair's flapping in the wind. It's hilarious and it's super sweet. I honestly wish in the next scene all of the kids started giving him trouble, like they were poking him and being like, oh, you got a new girlfriend. I felt like that would have been a very kid-like thing to do here, especially if they're leaning into that 80s nostalgia, but unfortunately, the scene kind of goes into a more serious topic and really dives into the mystery some more, but I thought there was a great opportunity there for some more chemistry building between the kids. But yeah, Neil ruled in this episode, definitely going to be a fan favorite coming out of this series, and I think the girl he interacted with gave a great performance in this episode. Before I jump into the final scene, I do want to talk about the convenience of Jod's storyline in this episode. So the one tribe stole the other tribe's livestock, and they were about to go to war to get them back. But before they can, Jod comes out of the smoke or the fog, and all of the livestock is returned to them, and he's the hero of the day. And he says he just paid off the other tribe and got all of the livestock back, and he paid them off with those Republic credits that we know are so valuable in the broader galaxy. But to me, why would a local tribe who doesn't know who this man is, why wouldn't they just kill him and take the credits? That doesn't feel like something a anarchistic tribe would do. The fact that it happened off screen gives some wiggle room that, this is Jod we're talking about. He's Crimson Jack. He's gotten over on people before. Did he use a force trick to manipulate the leader of the other tribe to accept the deal? Did he dispatch the tribesmen and he didn't end up paying them and he kept the Republic credits for himself? Maybe that's something they're setting up where later on, Wim and them discover that Jod still has the credits and they're going to be like, hey, I thought you gave them to the tribe. Why do you still have those? Maybe that's what they're setting up. I think in the moment of this episode, it feels very convenient, but it did happen off camera, so I have to give it some wiggle room. But if by the end of the show, it isn't brought up again and Jod just got away with this seemingly very convenient, simple solution to this tribal issue, then I'll have a bigger issue with this as a episode. I think it would be really good if Jod did something like this because I want him to be that scoundrel. I want him to still be ambiguous in where his loyalties lie because he's really buddy-buddy with these kids by the end of the episode. He has their hand on their shoulder, he's hugging them, he's saving their lives. I still want him to be a scoundrel. I don't want him to already be in love with these kids and wanting to be their father figure while they're out exploring the galaxy. But we have to see how this all pays off. So the final piece of this episode is they get into the Commissioner's Tower, they go to the top, and they enter a room where all of the pillars have coordinates to the other jewel planets of the Old Republic that Kim was presumably talking about in last episode. But they notice at Aden, the coordinates are scratched out. And before SM goes haywire, we get a really great scene with Fern, who the actress who portrays her did a fantastic job here. I really like the subtleties here. I like the voice cracks. All of it felt super authentic to the character because Fern doesn't want to show a lot of emotion. She is trying to hold that hard exterior. And it shows that she does genuinely take that captain title seriously. She doesn't just use that as a power thing, which I think a lot of people could have interpreted it that way early on in the series, but she truly says, I'm the captain because she felt that she was the best person to lead, not because it was like, I'm Fern, I'm the smartest, I'm the strongest, I need to be in control. It's really great to see that vulnerability here. And it is nice how this conversation with Wim, even though it doesn't end the best between them, it does lead her to think of the next revelation, which is, why is SM always saying, can't say I remember no at Aden? And Fern figures that it's because someone told the droid to erase its memory or to not speak of at Aden ever again. And I think this was a nice natural progression from the conversation with Wim, where Wim's like, you'll figure it out, you're amazing. And she's like, I'm not a droid, you can't just tell me to figure these things out. It's not going to happen just because you tell it to me. So she goes, wait. You can tell a droid to do anything. A droid will do whatever you say. So she goes up to him. She's like, I'm the captain. Remember at Aden. And he's like, oh, okay. I remember. Override success. I remember at Aden. But now that I remember At-Adden, I also remember that anyone that asks about At-Adden, I'm going to tear them limb from limb. And then it's a really creepy scene where he starts to rise up, he starts extending his body, and the Daniels do a really cool camera piece here where they have the camera kind of fish-eyed on SM's face as he's kind of going crazy, and all the kids are like, oh my god, he's gonna kill us. So SM starts stalking towards the kids, and Neil has another great moment where he throws a rock at SM, showing his bravery, showing that he cares for others, sometimes more than himself. And this gets SM's attention. He starts walking over to Neil, and Jod turns off SM. SM falls on top of Neil, and Neil passes out, and that's how the episode ends. All the kids like, Neil, wake up, wake up. I thought this was a really funny ending. As I've said, the humor has landed for the most part from episode 3 and episode 4. Episode 1 and 2 is kind of hit or miss, but I think the humor has been really strong in this show. It's striking a nice balance of being somewhat modern, but also being a bit nostalgic to like 80s, 90s, simpler, more physical comedy. And so we leave off on that. So we now know the other jewel planets. They have coordinates to the other ones. So next week we could potentially go to the other planets to maybe find out more information about them. You know, are they all like this one where it's become war-torn and At-Adden is the only one that's still keeping up the directive of the Utopia? Or are other ones closer to At-Adden? And if they go to those other ones, what will they find? And are they able to infiltrate the power structure there? I also think it's really cool that SM has this history with this captain who was onto At-Adden or was onto the treasure of At-Adden, and he told him to destroy the coordinates, and the ship that they found on At-Adden was crashed for probably hundreds of years because it was covered in dirt. So who was the captain? But that pretty much sums up my thoughts. I enjoyed this episode. I think there's a lot of really strong character moments. There's some great acting from the child actors, which has been a big surprise for me personally throughout this show. I think the environmental storytelling was super strong, really cuts down on expository dialogue that would usually bog down Star Wars shows like this. There are some conveniences in this episode that I would typically be much harsher on if it was another Disney live-action Star Wars show, but there's the potential that they could pay off later in the show. And also, like I said in the beginning, this show is made with such genuine love and respect for the property, and it feels extremely earnest in the way it's telling the story that I can overlook those minor conveniences for the sake of just enjoying the show. And you might say I'm hypocritical for that, but to be honest, there's a lot of other Disney live-action Star Wars shows that didn't have any strengths, and they had the conveniences in them, so there was nothing to make excuses for. In this show, I can make some excuses because there's all of these other positives going on around it. Not that I'm rooting for this show to continue relying on conveniences moving forward, I'm not, but it's just where my head's at when it comes to criticism at this point for this show. So, I'm enjoying it. Let me know what you guys think. Follow me on Instagram at @star_wars_mark of balance. Let me know how you're enjoying the show because I am not sure what the viewership is for this show. I don't know if it's performing well or not. Everyone is talking highly of it, so I hope that the word of mouth is getting out there, but I don't really know how many people are watching this show. So if you are, let me know what you think on Instagram, and please leave a review on whatever streaming platform you're listening to this podcast on. It really helps me out. I really appreciate it. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you. Peace.